I can't believe it's actually here. It feels like I've been waiting forever, but after 2 delays and so many gameplay trailer analyses, Deathloop has finally been released, and by the time you see this video, it will have only been just a few days since launch. Deathloop is a game that is occupying my thoughts at all times during each day that passes. It was my most anticipated game of these past few years. Not since Dishonored 2 and Prey's release have I been so excited to play another Arcane Studios game. But now that Deathloop is finally out in the wild, you're probably wondering to yourself, what do I think about Deathloop so far? It's a very good question, and one that quite honestly I'm struggling to answer even as I write out this script. My answer is actually several answers rolled into one. So I'm loving the moment-to-moment gameplay and freedom of player expression, in addition to the music and art style. However, performance problems have been ever present during my time with the game and have certainly made it difficult to enjoy it to its fullest potential. So without further introduction, these are my initial impressions of Arcane Studios' Deathloop. The first thing I want to start with is the art style and graphics. Obviously, if you've seen any of the official gameplay trailers, or even some of my own prior videos on Deathloop, you'll know that the game evokes a very heavy and stylized 1960s vibe. A wide and vibrant color palette is splashed all over the eponymous Black Reef Island where the game takes place. From the striking sunrise in the early morning hours on the beach, to the graffiti-laden districts inhabited by the Eternalists and the Aeon Visionaries. Each frame of Deathloop is beautifully and meticulously constructed so that whether or not you are playing as Colt or Juliana, you are always going to be looking at something flashy and interesting. Game director Dinga Bakaba and art director Sebastien Mitton have gone on record multiple times about Deathloop's influences, from classic action films like Escape from New York to the James Bond franchise, and famous architectural designers like Frank Lloyd Wright. Even the underground military bunkers on Black Reef are emblematic of the 1960s era military-industrial complex, and the bunkers give off the impression of a heavy nuclear fallout shelter, which was a common fear during that time. Honestly, I'm no artist or designer, but the different areas you explore in Deathloop are among the most visually compelling in any video game ever, and they even put much of Arcane's prior work on both Dishonored and Prey to shame. Graphically, the game runs on the same Void engine that powered Dishonored 2, and much like that title, Deathloop is also impressively detailed and an amazing showcase for any gaming PC or PS5 console. This is definitely one of the highlights of my experience so far, but what about the gameplay and the level design and how that feels compared to the studio's previous games? I'm happy to say that the moment-to-moment gameplay of sneaking, stabbing, and shooting is just as smooth as the Dishonored series, maybe even more so here. In fact, the Dishonored influence is very heavy on Deathloop, which is something that has been stated on multiple occasions by the dev team. However, I didn't quite realize just how heavy that influence would be until I actually got my hands on the game. Several of the powers and abilities are copy and pasted over from Dishonored, which aids in giving the player a sense of familiarity, and it definitely helped me to get settled into the game proper. Stealth is an important aspect of Deathloop's gameplay, especially in the early hours, as you are bereft of any powerful weapons or powers, and are relegated to the junk weaponry held by the Eternalists, which are more prone to jamming. Thankfully, once you unlock the ability to infuse your gear with Residuum, the strange energy that you collect as currency around each of the 4 districts, you won't need to worry much about cobbling together junk firearms from your enemies just to survive, and you'll be able to carry your favorite and most powerful gear over into each successive loop. The first-person shooting is also a highlight of the game for me, and it illustrates just how much Arcane Studios have learned over the years about making gunplay feel feel visceral and impactful. I remember reading somewhere that Machine Games, the team behind the Wolfenstein series, assisted in this regard, and if that's true, then Deathloop definitely benefited from their involvement. The design and layout of each of the 4 districts is, unsurprisingly, filled to the brim with many ways to approach your enemies and objectives. This should come as no surprise to fans of Arcane and their previous games, but I'm continuously blown away by just how many unique routes are available to take in each level. On top of that, each district has 4 distinct time periods that will either subtly or vastly alter how you approach the level, and it's honestly incredible how there are really only 4 levels in Deathloop, but the developers have managed to make it feel like there are over a dozen levels. This is something that deserves to be commended, in addition to the fact that repetition has not set in for me at any point during my time with the game. By nature of the game's repeating time loop, you'd think that you'd get bored pretty quickly of each of the 4 districts, since you'll be going back and forth exploring them constantly. But that simply isn't the case here, and it's incredible. I can't believe I'm saying this, but Arcane Studios have single-handedly done what no other developer has managed to do in my eyes. They've killed the idea of repetition in a video game. No run ever feels the same, and there are so many permutations to consider that it's mind-boggling. Out of all the things I've seen of the game, this is easily the thing that has impressed me the most. I'm not a musical expert, but the soundtrack for Deathloop is an absolute banger, and easily one of the most memorable video game soundtracks I've ever listened to. Dishonored and Prey had very defined musical stylings, and the same is true of Deathloop, with a big focus on 1960s jazz. Seriously, just listen to some of this combat music and tell me you wouldn't listen to this on your morning commute to work. I know I would. There's really not much else for me to say about the music of Deathloop, except to congratulate the geniuses that are Tom Salta, Ross Tregenza, and Eric Talaba for delivering a masterwork of auditory delight. Now, the PvP has definitely been one of the biggest mysteries for me leading up to the launch of the game, but I'm happy to say that PvP is a worthy inclusion in Deathloop, and it gets me more excited for what's to come next year with the co-op open-world focused Redfall from the Austin team. Playing as Juliana is a whole different ballgame. For starters, you're at a disadvantage from the beginning, as she only has 1 life compared to Colt's 3 lives, courtesy of the reprise ability. If Colt kills you, it's over, and you'll have to find another player to invade. However, it never feels like a total loss, even if Colt gets the better of you. As Juliana, you can rank up and earn new gear to take into each invasion, which will aid you in either eliminating Colt, or in many of my instances, manipulating him and messing with him, which is arguably more fun than a straight-up fight. Juliana's masquerade ability makes the proceedings even more interesting, as she can assume the identity of any NPC on the map, including Colt himself. You can set up an ambush quickly and easily in this way to get the jump on Colt, and it is incredibly satisfying. The PvP mode adds so much more content to the game and will no doubt give it life far beyond the normal lifespan of a traditional single-player game. Plus, the skins you can unlock for both Juliana and Colt are stylish as hell and much appreciated. Even though there are many things to love about Deathloop, performance, at least on the PC, is definitely not one of them. I had hoped for a much smoother experience at launch, given the issues that plagued Dishonored 2 on PC when that game first released. Death of the Outsider ran much more smoothly for me, and I was hoping to see Deathloop be comparable to that game in terms of performance. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, stuttering issues, frame drops, and an inconsistent frame rate have plagued my gameplay experience even after lowering my settings, and knowing full well that my system specs are capable of running this game at much higher settings. A small patch has already been released for the game by the time this video goes live, and Arcane are actively working on pushing out a fix for the stuttering problem, so at least the developers are responding quickly to the feedback. Thankfully, this is the only real issue I have with Deathloop at this time, and I have no doubt that once these issues are ironed out, this will be the 10 out of 10 game that I hoped it would be. As we get closer to the end of the video, I wanted to talk about some other things worth mentioning that I didn't cover in the prior sections, mainly the story. For the sake of avoiding spoilers, I won't discuss the story at length, but I will say that it has me hooked and invested in the mystery of the loop and Colt and Juliana's roles to play. There are many huge story moments and reveals within just the first few hours of the game, and that really surprised me. And these moments disprove many theories about the game, including some of my own. The lore and world building are also top-notch and help to flesh out the world even further by providing background on Black Reef's history and the history of the Visionaries. The interplay and dialogue between Colt and Juliana is hilarious and makes them two of my new favorite characters in any video game ever. The vocal performances of Jason Kelly as Colt and Ozioma Akaga as Juliana are stellar, and they should be commended for bringing so much life and heart into their respective characters. The breadth of customization for your gear before each loop is immense and deep. Trinkets will give you passive buffs to your weapons, abilities, and your character, and provide a wide array of potential loadouts for both Colt and Juliana. You could create an entirely stealth-focused loadout with your trinkets, weapons, and abilities, or you could go guns blazing and focus your character build on dishing out as much damage as possible without much care for the repercussions. Arcane's philosophy of player freedom and saying yes to the player is more apparent here than it has ever been, and continues to prove that Arcane Studios are the best in the business as far as I'm concerned. Overall, Deathloop has managed to both meet my expectations and exceed them in many ways. It's an intelligently designed murder puzzle and is most certainly not a game for those wanting a casual experience, or a game that you can just turn your brain off to play. This is, much like Dishonored and Prey before it, a thinking man's game, and I wouldn't have it any other way. The perfect review scores that Deathloop has received further reinforces what I have been saying for a long time. Arcane Studios are masters of their craft, and their games deserve to be far more successful than many of their contemporaries. After a long wait, Deathloop is finally here, and after about 15 hours of playtime, the wait has most definitely been worth it. And this will be a game that, much like the title suggests, I'll be returning to over and over and over again. So these are my initial impressions of Deathloop so far, but now I want to know what you think about the game in the comments down below. Have you played Deathloop yet? Is it everything you'd hoped it would be? Are there components of the game that you feel might have missed the mark? Let me know your answers and leave a like on this video if you enjoyed. Consider subscribing for even more Deathloop content in the future. There's going to be a lot of it. And be sure to hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. And remember that the outsider walks among us. Thanks for watching.